After years of making short films that were getting rejected by what felt like every single film festival in the world, a couple years ago I finally broke through and got into a bunch of really solid film festivals with a short film I made called Will the Machine. And I'm going to share with you guys what I did differently to finally break through that barrier and get into these fests. And then once I actually got into these festivals and got to meet all the other filmmakers and drink at the open bars and watch a ton of short films and drink at the open bars, I learned so much more that's going to make it so much easier to get in the future when I submit. So I'm going to share that information with you guys too, and hopefully save you all a bunch of money in submission fees. Hey, if you're new to the channel, I'm Kent Lamb. I'm a filmmaker, been making films for 20 years since I was a little kid. Made a couple that went viral, including one called Will the Machine. Now, the thing that kind of made this short film that got into these fests different was I kind of put the film together like a package. And if you're trying to get into film festivals, you need to think like a film festival programmer. And when they're getting a ton of short films submitted from all over the world, there's a lot of different things that are going into your films that will make it more appealing than other films that maybe have similar stories, similar production values, etc., right? So what are the things that are in the package of your film that are going to make it stand out and be an attractive selection for their festival? Well, there's the cheat mode, which is get a recognizable actor in your film. That is always going to make your film more attractive to festivals because they can get more butts in seats, they can sell more tickets, they can get more press for the festival. Everything. Now, my short Will the Machine actually did have an actor that was in a lot of movies, Denzel Whitaker. And when I submitted the film in the synopsis, it says starring Chris Fornatero and Denzel Whitaker, in parentheses, Black Panther. I think that goes a long way. And there are ways to get recognizable actors to be in your short films, and maybe I'll do a video about that later. But if that's outside the scope of possibility for you right now, you don't need Leonardo DiCaprio to be in your film to get into a good film festival. You can actually do something kind of similar on a easier scale just by looking for cast and crew members that are legacies of that festival that you want to get into, for example. So if you find a director of photography that's made some short films that got into Sundance or whatever festival you're trying to get into, having that name and those connections, it's going to put a little extra attention on your film. Another aspect of the package of your film that will help make it more attractive to a film festival is how polished it is. Because, these films that they select are a reflection of the festival. So nobody wants to put something up on the big screen that's going to make them look bad. Is the mix bad? Can the audience not understand what your characters are saying? Is the color awful? Are the skin tones really weird? Is there camera shake where there isn't supposed to be camera shake? Stuff like that can really hurt your chances of getting in just because those things take an audience out of a film. They make them look like amateur films. And even though all these films and film festivals technically are amateur films, the festivals don't want to be putting up something that looks unpolished because it makes their festival look unpolished. Another big aspect of the package that you're presenting is it fresh? Does your film feel like something that's fresh in the scene of independent filmmaking? Now, there's a lot of aspects that go into that. I'm going to expand on it a little later. But just be thinking, has this story or this kind of film been done 1,000 times before? Is mine going to stand out in any kind of way? What makes this feel fresh and exciting for a festival and for their audience? And going along with that, there's the issue of programmability. Short films, if you go to a film festival, are broken up into blocks of programming. So you might get like 5 or 8 short films in each block, and it ends up being about the runtime of like a feature film, right? But if your short film is really long, then there's going to be less short films that can fit into that block, which is going to make your film harder to program. So the shorter your film is, the easier it is to program. In other words, just fit into one of these blocks. And I'm going to expand on that a little later, but it also applies to the genre. And then just the last point I'm going to make about presenting a package to these film festivals is the film itself is obviously the most important thing that you're presenting, but there's also supporting materials that could really help or hurt you. For example, the poster or key art for your film. If it looks like dog shit, that's going to go in the programming books for the festival, and they don't want a poster that looks like it was made by an 8-year-old in Microsoft Paint. So if you don't have a graphic designer friend or somebody that can help you put together a professional looking poster, it might be worth spending money on. And the same thing goes with even like trailers and the synopsis. Take the extra time to write a good synopsis that fits into the length requirements that they have and make it sound like a really captivating film that people are gonna wanna go watch. Same for the trailer. Don't make a 2-minute long trailer for your 4-minute long film. Do something really short but captivating and alluring to a viewer. Put together a great package, and this should start from the very beginning of making your film. If your film is gonna be intended for a film festival run, then you should be thinking about these things from the beginning. Another thing I did differently is I just got organized. In the past, I would just finish the film and then I'd be like, what film festivals are coming up? Okay, I'm just gonna shotgun send it out to like 6 film festivals and see what happens. This time around though, I got a lot more organized and a lot more strategic about how I was submitting to the festivals with the help of one of my producers who had way more experience than me getting into good festivals, which is another thing I recommend. Try to bring somebody on board who does have film festival experience. So what he recommended was that I make a Google Sheet spreadsheet of all the film festivals that I wanted to submit to and fill it out with a bunch of information and use that as my organization and strategy for submitting to film festivals. And that's exactly what I did. So here's a Google spreadsheet I made with a bunch of film festivals in here. And it's all color-coded and there's columns, and I blacked out some information that I didn't want you all to see. And this was like our Bible for submitting to film festivals. So the first thing I did was I went through and made the wish list of festivals that I wanted to get into. That's gonna require some research, looking up what festivals are respectable, which ones have been around, which ones are a good fit for your film. This is another situation where having a producer or somebody on your team who's really familiar with the festival circuit is really, really valuable. And there were notes, like for example, if we knew anybody from the festival, if there were any specific rules that might be a problem for our film. If we knew anybody, we put the contact person's name, title, and email here. Most of them, by the way, we definitely didn't know anybody there. So most of these are cold submissions. The country the film festival takes place in. Is it an Oscar qualifying fest, which means if it wins an award there, you're actually on the long list for being nominated for an Oscar for Best Short Film. Incredibly unlikely to actually happen, but it is an indicator that it is a respectable festival worth submitting to. Whether or not the festival requires premiere status, that's important to note. The deadline for submitting, what type of deadline? Is it late, early bird, regular? And obviously you want to submit to as many early bird deadlines as possible just to save money, because look, these costs add up. Look at this, 55, 40, 45, 25. I mean, it is expensive. And then the date I submitted, the tracking number, etc. And as you can see, purple are the festivals that we got accepted to. Orange are the festivals that we got rejected from. And you do not want to see how many orange are on this list, but I'll just go ahead and show you. Quite a lot more than purple. And that is to be expected pretty much no matter how good your film is. So I highly recommend making a spreadsheet like this if you're gonna be submitting to film festivals yourself. And in fact, I'm happy to share mine. Sign up for my newsletter in the description. I'm gonna include it as a little freebie. So just go to the description, sign up with your email address, and I'll send you a copy of the spreadsheet. I'll clean it up a little bit, and you'll have a nice starting point for your own festival run. Just keep in mind that the dates of the deadlines and the costs and things like that are going to be a couple of years out of date and will have changed a little bit. And as far as strategy, we did what most people suggest doing, which is, start with the bigger festivals, the long shot festivals that you really want to get into but are going to be a lot more competitive. A lot of those festivals require a premiere status. And after submitting to those major film festivals that are kind of the long shot fest, we started submitting to the more mid-tier film festivals that are really respectable, like Florida, New Orleans, and Holly Shorts and all that. And that's where we really started to find that we were getting acceptances, right? Now, some people say like, oh, submit to the big ones and then wait until you hear back from all of them whether you got in or not. Don't do that, because odds are you're not gonna get in. And even if you do get in, just tell the other festivals that you got accepted into that, hey, we got into South by Southwest. They want it to be a premiere, so we can't screen at your festival. Just make it work, but don't put yourself in a position where you're submitting to major festivals and not submitting anywhere else for like a year until you hear back from every single one of them because you're hoping for that gigantic premiere. Start spreading those submissions around and honestly start looking towards making your next short film. And what happened with The Will of the Machine is we started getting a ton of rejections right off the bat. We were like, well, I guess, anything we touch is just never gonna get into a film festival. But we finally got accepted into Beverly Hills Film Festival, and then right after that we got accepted into Florida Film Festival, and it started snowballing from there. And I don't know if that's because other festivals are seeing that we got into these film festivals and it gives us a little more credibility when they look at us, or if it's just that's how long it took before we started getting the acceptances. But it did feel like a snowball effect, and I don't think that that's uncommon. Which brings me to my next point, which is you have to be prepared to spend some money on these film festival submissions if you want to have a good film festival run. Now, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you how much I spent submitting Will the Machine, but it was a part of the strategy for the film. We knew this film was going to be for film festivals, so we dedicated a good chunk of our budget to that. And look, if you look on the spreadsheet here, $2,760 in submission fees. Wow, that's crazy, right? That's more expensive than most of the short films I've ever made. But for this film, this is what we wanted it to do. We wanted it to get into film festivals. And if we had only spent like $400 on film festival submissions, we might not have gotten in anywhere because we got a lot of rejections right off the bat, but eventually that shifted and we started getting a lot of acceptances. So I think if we had only spent a little bit and submitted just to the big festivals, we wouldn't have had a film festival run, and that's a big difference. So you do have to be prepared to commit money to this end. And to be fair, I didn't do a ton of research into all these film festivals, so I probably did waste some money submitting to a lot more festivals than I needed to. There were probably some festivals I submitted to that we didn't really have a chance because they weren't really geared towards the kind of film that we were submitting. So if you want to save money, you can save that money by putting more time into researching the festivals that you're submitting to, and only submit to the ones that are a good fit for your film. We ended up getting into about a third of the festivals that we submitted to, which is actually a really good acceptance rate. So again, to reiterate this part, you're going to have to spend money if you want to have a good festival run. The only way to get through a festival run really cheaply is if you submit to just the big festivals and you happen to win that lottery and get into Sundance or South by Southwest or Slam Dance or TIFF, and then you're going to start getting invited by tons of other festivals. You won't have to submit at all. But most of us are not going to win that lottery, so you will have to save some money to submit to some festivals. If you know anybody who's involved with these festivals, whether they're a screener or a programmer or a festival director especially, definitely take advantage and leverage that connection and reach out to them directly with the film. The worst they can say is, just submit it through the normal channels. But at best, you can either get a waiver for your submission and you'll get extra eyes on your film from a higher up level. So as opposed to some volunteer and they might watch the first 5 minutes of it or 10 seconds of it and say, oh, this is garbage, and turn it off, you're getting somebody at the top, the real decision maker, to watch your film. I know that we all want our films to stand on their own merit and get in just as a cold submission, but the reality is the bigger the festival, the harder it's going to be to get in as a cold submission compared to a lot of these films that are getting sent through personal connections and are getting extra attention put on them because of that. So leverage any advantage that you have. So getting back to one of the points I was talking about in the beginning with the package of your film, I was talking about freshness. Is your film and the package that you're presenting to them, does it feel fresh? And a big part of freshness is your voice. They're looking to present themselves as the cutting edge of modern independent filmmaking, right? They want new. Not too new, but new. So they want films that are pushing filmmaking into new ground. They want films that are making the audience, more uncomfortable. It's more unique storytelling. It's a more creative vision, but not too creative because it still has to appeal to an audience that they're going to fill out that theater with, right? And for the bigger festivals, that audience is largely industry people. So if you're doing some crazy experimental film, it's going to have a hard time getting into one of these top tier mainstream festivals, except for maybe their alternative programming sections. If it's too inaccessible to a regular audience, it can actually be a hindrance to you. And here's the biggest thing that held me back from getting into film festivals for the longest time. Until I started getting into these film festivals, I never really went to film festivals. And that's a huge oversight on my part. I watched a ton of short films from people I knew on Vimeo, on YouTube, wherever, but there's a big difference going to a film festival and watching short films in that setting where you're in a theater and they're just playing back to back to back to back, and you're watching them with an audience. Completely different environment, and it makes you look at the films completely differently too. You're going to notice something. You're going to notice that not that many of the short films actually stand out, or you don't actually remember and think about them the next day. You just watched maybe 50 short films in a day, and maybe there's only 2 or 3 that actually stuck with you. What does that mean? It means that of the films that they accepted, only a few really stuck with you. So think about how all the films that didn't get accepted, which there are way, way more of, think about how forgettable those would have been. Now imagine your film in the middle of a film block. How would the audience have reacted to it? Would it have stuck with them? Even in the context of all these other short films of different genres and storylines and levels of production and all of that, would your film have really stuck out to them? So your job is to make a short film that does stand out amongst a sea of other really good short films. And how do you do that? Well, obviously you want to make the best short film possible, but that's not the whole thing. You want to find your voice and you want to lean into it as hard as you can. So lean into your sensibilities as hard as you can with your short films. Like, do you love cheesy zoom shots? Well, use it in an unexpected way that somehow works. Do you love overlapping dialogue in films? Then dizzy us with the whole flurry of dialogue that forces the audience to lean forward and really pay attention to your film. Or do films about parents getting separated from their children just make you bawl your eyes out more than anything else? Then make a film about that and find what you love in films and reappropriate it in your own way. And that's how you find your voice and you make a film that stands out amongst a sea of more generic films. For examples of films that I feel like have really strong, unique voices, check out the Vimeo staff picks, especially the ones that have played at big festivals. Those are generally picked because they have a real strength of vision and voice. And those are great examples of films that those top tier film festivals love to get. And another thing with freshness is you don't want to be doing cliches in your films. Honestly, the bigger the festivals you try to get into, the more common cliches are just going to be like an immediate pass for your film. So definitely check out my video on short film cliches to avoid so you don't do any of those. And moving away from those intangible qualities is something that's super concrete and incredibly important for getting your film into festivals: runtime. So if your film is 21 minutes long, that could have been 3 7-minute long short films that got accepted to the festival. Your film took that spot. So that means 3 other filmmakers don't get to come to Park City or whatever. So you really got to ask yourself, is my film good enough to take the place of 2 or 3 other films? My first cut of Will the Machine was over 20 minutes long, and we ended up cutting it down to 13 and a half minutes or something, which allowed now an additional 7-minute film to be in my screening block for each of these film festivals. So it's just, you're making a more attractive offer to the film festival when your film is short and really easy to slip into any of their short film blocks. In fact, if you want a cheat code to getting into a ton of film festivals, here's what you do. Make a 1 to 3 minute long comedy short film that plays really well in front of an audience. That's it. You'll get into a ton of film festivals if you can do that. The reason is it's extremely short, so you can program it into almost any short film block at the festival. It's going to act like a palate cleanser for the audience. So if you're in a really heavy short film block, they can just slide it right between 2 serious dramas. So it's just really upping the odds of you getting programmed into a festival. Now the downside of that is that those really short 1 to 3 minute long films, especially if they're comedies, don't tend to get as much attention and praise as the longer, harder hitting dramas, for example, do at these film festivals. But hey, if you're just looking for a resume line of I got into Sundance. My cat's joining us. If you get into Sundance, then who cares? You can just say, I made a short film that got into Sundance, and then parlay that into your next film, which maybe is a hard-hitting drama, you know what I mean? Louis done. So now that I've actually gone on the film festival circuit and attended a bunch of these film festivals, here's the things that I learned that are going to make it so much easier to get in the next time I make a short film that I want to submit to film fests. 1, having gone to these film festivals, I know the tastes of the individual festivals, what they like, what they don't like, so I'm only going to submit to the ones that I have a good shot at getting into. 2, I'm considered a legacy filmmaker at these festivals now, so I can probably submit without paying a submission fee, or I can reach out to the festival director directly and remind them who I am, or I can just say in my cover letter with my submission that, I'm an alumni of the festival. And those things really do help get extra consideration for your film. And 3, and honestly most importantly, I'm going to hammer this point again, having gone to a bunch of film festivals and sat in a bunch of audiences watching a ton of short films, I have a much, much better understanding of what makes a short film stand out amongst a sea of other short films. So I'm not going to even submit to a festival unless I really think that I have something that is worthy and will stand out to a crowd. and play well in a theater. And he wants to come up again. He's biting my ankles. So I highly, highly recommend, no matter what festivals you're trying to get into, go to whatever festival you can and get that experience of watching a ton of short films and seeing what crowds are responding to. If you found any of this useful, please thumbs up and subscribe. It really does help this channel grow, and I want to keep making videos like this to help you further your own filmmaking career. And sign up for the email newsletter in the description. It's not going to be spam or anything like that. I'm just going to give you useful filmmaking resources whenever I come across them. Like, for example, this film festival spreadsheet, I'll send that out right after you sign up. So you'll be able to start building your own film festival strategy based off of that. That's it. I'm Kent Lamb. I'll see y'all next time.